I unabashedly love Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Yes, Wizards of the Coast as a corporation or their parent company Hasbro are frequently far from perfect or even all that good, and throughout its history D&D has not been immune to spillover in that regard. And yes, a thankfully small but unfortunately loud faction of the D&D fanbase does their damnedest to be obnoxious assholes to any stranger on the internet whenever they perceive someone to be doing their hobby wrong by whatever self-centered definition they personally decided was the immutable law of the multiverse that week. Yes, there are a plethora of other as good or better tabletop games out there that run the gamut from corporate competition to scrappy indie creators carving out their own niches for fan bases on itch.io, Twitter, Patreon, or wherever else. Despite all of that, D&D is special for me. I haven't been doing this for many decades, but I can say that my tabletop gaming history does go back, actually almost 2 now. That's old enough to remember tabletop games in general being that weird outcast hobby that you didn't talk about in mixed company where you hadn't vetted everybody for nerdy acceptance yet. I remember ducking into the game section at Barnes & Noble and looking at the monster manual and wondering what it would be like to have a regular group to play this awesome-looking game with. Not super easy to come by when you're moving states every couple of years and usually not getting stationed in a town that is big enough for, vibrant enough to have a local game store scene that's also accepting of random teenagers who want to show up and play when their parents will take them. There were periods of time where I would go years between having an opportunity to play D&D or any other tabletop game like it, relishing and reliving those half-cocked one-shots that a friend of someone needed a few extra bodies to fill the table with, before half of them lost interest and inevitably the other half of the table couldn't coordinate a second session and keep things going afterwards. A couple thousand hours of Neverwinter Nights and a stack of R.A. Salvatore novels took the edge off, but it was never the same thing as getting around a table with a group of like-minded friends and throwing dice. This obviously doesn't describe everybody's experience, but that was mine growing up. Tabletop gaming in general, and D&D in particular, was this wouldn't it be cool kind of game that lived in my imagination, but I could never actually get to. Even in college, the campus club didn't sync with my class schedule, and I was left with another bout of might have beens and moved on with life. 5e changed all of that for me. Some of 5e's success is undoubtedly due to lessons learned from the successes and failures of past editions, and surely a lot of it was timing and good luck, but Wizards of the Coast bottled lightning with 5th edition. The cultural mainstreaming of nerddom and fandom put a crack in the dam, and then the rise of actual play games helmed by popular creators, even celebrities, battered it down. And suddenly D&D was everywhere. The first of these shows rode the wave as streaming and podcasting went from being obscure to ubiquitous forms of entertainment. It's easy to forget now in 2022 that this is all still relatively new. Cut to me 5 years ago, September 2018, I'm sitting in my apartment with a long weekend. I've just finished up binging whatever show was on Netflix that I was watching, looking for my new options. I got no plans coming up. I stumble across Season 1 of Dimension 20, Fantasy High. I was vaguely aware of what an actual play was. Critical Role had been going for a couple of years at this point, as had Acquisitions Incorporated, The Adventure Zone, but I'd never really gotten into any of these, and I figured, why not? Let's give it a shot. I remember thinking that watching people play a board game couldn't possibly be entertaining, but I was a fan of the College Humor cast, and I'd watched a bunch of other stuff they were recently in, and I said, okay, sure. By the end of the weekend, I had copies of the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual, the Player's Handbook, and I was informing the 5 most likely candidates that I could think of that I would be running a 5e session at my house in the coming weeks, whether or not any of them actually showed up. 3 of them did. And just like that, I was back in. And it never stopped. D&D had, in my world at least, finally gotten enough cultural momentum that I could always find players. I could always find a table to go to, I could always get people excited about it, and I could always find people who were ready to try. Surely a lot of that had to do with my age at the time as well. Adults with personal transportation and zero social fucks left to give have a lot more agency when it comes to choosing their hobbies and what they're interested in than teenagers who are worried about being bullied for liking the wrong thing in high school. New technology aided too. Being able to Google obscure rules, pull up calculators and tools to make things easier, and not having to have an encyclopedic amount of homework in order to play the game to begin with did a lot to lower the barrier to entry for me as a dungeon master and people who were interested in trying as players but maybe would have been turned off in past editions or past times. Cause, effect, or recursion, however, it doesn't really matter. 5e was sitting at the nexus of all of these factors, and it reaped the rewards commercially and culturally. When I moved 3,000 miles away the year after, the first invitation I got when I landed in my new town was from college friends who wanted me to join their standing table. A couple of months later, I was one of the rotating DMs, and we took our groups through parallel campaigns where we traded off one week to the next who was running their game. Mine was a homebrew pirate swashbuckling airship adventure called Salt and Iron. That's not relevant, but it's a great name and I wanted to share. I started creating my own content for that table. I've gotten to play a half dozen new, old, and exciting different systems other than 5e as one-shots with that group when we want to do side arcs or take a break. I've reconnected with friends I haven't seen in decades playing this game. I met the love of my life at that table. Houndsong Games, which I'm working on now, welcome to the channel, was launched from that table. It is not an exaggeration for me to say that my life could look very, very different today if it were not for this game. Yes, maybe in this alternative timeline something else would have filled the space, but it didn't, and here we are. About 2 years ago, as I'm recording this, I had an idea. I wanted to take a lot of the lessons I'd learned from running Salt and Iron and figuring out these big swashbuckling airship battles and all these other mechanics that we'd kind of come up with piecemeal throughout the years that we'd had fun with, and go higher, bigger, and broader with it. I wanted to play the game that my table loved, and I know there's others out there, so don't at me, but I wanted to play the game that my table loved that got us together and kept us going in my other favorite genre, science fiction. I wanted to create my own space setting. Not a science fantasy like Spelljammer, as fun as that can be, but a true science fiction expansion with aliens, starship battles, mecha fights, power armor, orbital drops, artificial intelligence, the exact flavor of futurism that straddles the line between utopian dreams and existential dread, all of my favorite genre staples. But being who I am and having the background that I do, I was gonna do a whole ass thing about it. I was gonna write a book. I asked another artist friend of mine to help me out with some of the visuals, roped my weekly table into playtesting, and got to it. Thus was born Sea of Cinders, and by extension, Houndsong Games, the umbrella for which I would create it and my other nerdy projects under. Sea of Cinders and other Houndsong projects have consumed the majority of my creative output since then. I'm not going to delve too far into any of that for this video. The salient point here today for this topic is that Sea of Cinders relies on two important pillars of the third-party 5th edition content creation community: the Open Game License, the OGL, and the 5e system reference document called the 5e SRD, or just SRD for short. Cutting through some legalese, taken together, the 5e SRD and the OGL are a means for third-party creators to legally create content that runs on the same game mechanisms and underpinnings that 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons does, and to advertise it as such. Very simplified. As long as you're not creating things with named characters and settings that Wizards of the Coast has specifically reserved for themselves, like Neverwinter, Eberron, Waterdeep, Ravnica, or any of the other things that are laid out in the OGL agreement, then you can create and sell 5e material, and you don't have to talk to them, you don't have to sit down with their lawyers, you don't have to hash out a contract. It's there. That's the license. And a lot of people do, me included. If you've seen products by Green Ronin Gaming, Kobold Press, get these in frame, the original Critical Role material that came out before they had their own partnerships, Ghostfire Gaming, Hit Point Press, or a bajillion others. Punch the microphone. Good job, Chris. You've seen OGL content. It's in here. Literally, it legally has to be. That's the OGL license in the back. It's in every single one of these. Yeah, that bit was totally worth the 5 pounds of props. This has generally been viewed as a win-win for all parties. Wizards of the Coast gets content that promotes and relies on its core products. Us indies get a built-in audience from the jump, and we don't have to fight the brutally uphill battle of getting strangers to notice, learn, and then enjoy our new gaming system, whatever it may be. It's not for everybody. There's certainly ways to do that successfully, but if you're gonna capture a small segment of an audience of the indie scene somewhere, there are obvious advantages in starting with the biggest slice of the pie before you cut down to what you're actually going to get. There's one other avenue for third-party creation that I didn't mention, and that's called the DMsGuild. Wizards of the Coast maintains this website, DMsGuild, as a one-stop shop and marketplace for indie content with a couple stipulations. The big appeals for creators using the DMsGuild are the consolidation of the audience further. Wizards curates and promotes the site, built-in print and publishing options, which are nice, and permission to create with those otherwise Wizards exclusive materials and intellectual properties like the Forgotten Realms that you can't do under the OGL. The downside is that the leash is a good bit tighter when it comes to going your own way. Wizards gets a cut of the proceeds, and while they do not technically own any of the original IP that you may create when working under the DMsGuild and posting material there, they do get a license to use it. Arguably a distinction without a difference, but I'm not a lawyer. They state on their website that despite that, they will contact you about purchasing any IP that they really, really want, but as far as I'm aware, they are not required to do so. If it's on there, you've already given them the license to use it. It's just a courtesy that they're going to pay you if they decide to publish something that you made. There's no requirement, as far as I'm aware, that whatever they do decide to compensate you with in a case like this has to be that significant. It could be $5 a sandwich and a handshake. I don't know. If anyone knows of a case where this has actually happened, I would be curious to hear the details down in the comments. I'm not super into the DMsGuild sphere of influence and everything, so there might be a story out there that I'm just not aware of, but I'm curious to know more. Nothing I'm saying in this video should be considered legal advice, by the way. I'm skimming and simplifying a lot for the purposes of getting to my main topic and establishing some background. If you're a creator who's looking into using the OGL, the SRD, the DMsGuild, or any other third-party marketplace for that matter, like itch.io or DriveThruRPG or several others, you need to dive deeper than I'm going to get into here for yourself. So, with that out of the way. Now we've touched on the rise of 5th edition, the open game license, and the system reference document, the DMsGuild, and how they relate to me as both a consumer and to Houndsong Games, my business as a third-party content creator. Now let's get to OneDnD and where it all might come crashing down. It's important for me to say up top here that these next sections, this whole video really, contain a lot of speculation and opinion. I make no claims to any special foresight or insider knowledge and could very well be wrong about some or all of what I'm going to talk about. In fact, I hope I am for reasons that we'll get into. This is more of a plan for the worst, hope for the best, and here's what I'm doing kind of thing, and should be taken as such. You can imagine, after the first 6 months or so of grinding on Sea of Cinders, how alarmed I was when Wizards of the Coast out of nowhere announced OneDnD. Of course, the corporate juggernaut whose coattails I was tiptoeing around would uproot all of the goalposts and change all of the rules once I was elbow deep in making a thing that was going to take years to complete. Figures. But they quickly emphasized that supposedly OneDnD will remain at least nominally compatible with 5e content, and I took some comfort in that and carried on. After all, it made business sense. They would want to release their next thing without cutting off the biggest cash flow they've ever had from the franchise or alienating the audience. And, they probably want to maintain some semblance of status quo or at least a bridge for a while. Who knows how long it will take this huge, unprecedented 5th edition audience to migrate over to a new edition. That makes sense. Sea of Cinders could continue, and we could find ways to adapt as long as the pace of change didn't outpace our ability to keep up with those changes. Then I saw the trailer. Earlier this year, Wizards of the Coast acquired D&D Beyond, the popular online interface for running 5th edition games, for about $146 million, and announced that they were going to be pursuing their own brand new virtual tabletop incarnation, as opposed to partnering with or acquiring one of the current iterations that are already on the market, like Roll20. We finally got a glimpse of what that new virtual tabletop environment is going to look like with the OneDnD trailer. Instead of a 2D space like Roll20 or other popular sites provide, the official WotC incarnation was running on Unreal Engine 5. We don't know a ton about the interface or toolset yet as I'm recording this, but I'll say here that at least graphically it looks cool as hell. Bringing Unreal 5 to a tabletop simulation is a little bit like bringing a tank to a knife fight. It is so much above and beyond what the bare minimum and the status quo is. It is impressive from a technological and graphical standpoint that I don't think is really in contention. Well, I'm sure that many of us will stick to graph paper and plastic minis for the foreseeable future. There's no denying that virtual tabletops have a growing place in the community, especially when playing online or with people from all over the world. Post lockdown, my own group liked our online experience so much that we created a hybrid, DIYing an old TV into a new tabletop service that allowed us to project digital maps and assets under our physical minis and terrain and other accessories that we used sitting around the table drinking beer with each other. It's awesome, given all that. It's perfectly natural to expect to see us transition from 2D to 3D tool sets, at least for some percentage of this online space. It's a natural progression of the technology, complete with animations and special effects and cool graphics and whatever else. But this is where alarm bells started going off in my head. Wizards is hardly the first company to imagine a virtual high-fidelity 3D tabletop environment, but the fact that it is coming directly from Wizards of the Coast is significant, especially after their D&D Beyond acquisition. Most of you watching this will not know me from much beyond this channel, nor should you, really. Once upon a time, I spent a good few years in the belly of corporate America working for an industrial tool and hardware company in Seattle that was eagerly converting itself into a software company as it grew, expanded its portfolio, and acquired smaller businesses. The relevant part of that experience for us today is that I know what a walled garden is when I see one. In software, a walled garden, also called a closed platform or a closed ecosystem, is a service in which only permitted users can move about freely and use the features that their level of access gives them permission to do so. This is often benign or even beneficial. You probably, for example, don't want random digital passersby to have access to your cloud storage or your company's Slack channel, for example, your email, etc. But when these services get commercialized, things get complicated. Social media companies and the tech giants that we're all so familiar with are also walled gardens. Except in their ecosystems, the focus is on extracting value from the occupants of the garden, not selling them access to it. If you've ever tried to transition between Mac or iOS to Android or PC, or vice versa, you've probably run into this. Both the App Store and the Play Store, for example, and their associated hardware are walled gardens in their own right. Walking away from one might mean leaving the phone you like, the accessories you have, the chargers you've accumulated, and that's just the physical stuff. Saved files, movies, songs, images, apps, subscriptions, ebooks, preferences, gestures, habits, all of these are opportunities to keep a user where they are. Again, I'm oversimplifying here. Many of these can be overcome with workarounds, and some require replacement apps in the new ecosystem. Some translate perfectly fine, and still others become wholly inaccessible from one system to the other. Often it's not that a walled garden is inescapable. Locking things down too tight also means that new users have trouble coming in, and neither side wants that. But neither of them have a financial incentive to make leaving terribly easy either. Search for instructions on migrating iCloud to Google Drive, or vice versa, and you'll get a list of methods to try, one of which will surely work for whatever your personal needs are. But for every user who puts up with the hassle, another is dissuaded, remaining where they are, and by extension, continuing to spend their money, generate valuable data, and be a receptacle for advertising for the ecosystem that they're already invested in. That means that when the new phone comes out for that ecosystem, they're much more likely to purchase that one than make the switch, and so on and so forth for accessories, for services, for other things, for whatever might roll out next. If I have an iPad, I am more likely to also buy a Mac computer or an iPhone cell phone than I am to be a cross-platform user, like me, because I'm weird. How does this apply to tabletop games? Well, we only have to look at the other pillar of my entertainment existence, video games. Once upon a time, kids, games were sold in a box, on a shelf. You bought the game, took it home, took the disc or cartridge that was in that box, and put it into the appropriate machine, and you played the game you owned. Neat. Broadband internet and digital downloads changed video games forever. First, it was patching. Devs being able to fix bugs after shipping is a double-edged sword that many have commented on since it first happened, and most of the time it's fine, good, even. Digital sales further revolutionized that. You probably know what Steam is, even if you're not an avid video gamer. Then that led to DLC, easy access to mods, and on through iterations that could all merit videos of their own, till we get to the modern incarnations, free-to-play games, or even worse, the dreaded live service model. A lot of you may see where I'm going with this. In June of 2022, Activision Blizzard launched a little game called Diablo Immortal, a mobile iteration of the action RPG franchise designed for people who have phones. Diablo Immortal is ostensibly a free game, and is apparently actually pretty good. Diablo Immortal has also been heavily criticized as being one of the most precisely engineered predatory implementations of microtransactions ever produced by man. There have been some opinions amongst the fanbase. But what is not up for debate is that the game has done precisely what, from a business sense, it was supposed to do: print frickin' banknotes. Monetized free-to-play, purchase plus microtransaction, loot box, live service, and/or subscription-based games have become the new norm in the video game industry because in many situations they massively outperform traditional sales models from a financial standpoint, if not a customer experience one. I'm not here to tell you what to think about that. I bring all of this up to say this: money works the same way in the Hasbro conference rooms as it does at Activision Blizzard. My concern when looking at the totality of Wizards of the Coast acquiring D&D Beyond and the subsequent strong push towards a proprietary closed digital ecosystem was twofold. First, how precisely is the indie creator community supposed to engage with a product that is jumping in complexity from a written PDF to most of a video game? And second, does the enormous financial incentive at play in an ecosystem like that mean that we're going to see D&D trend towards the highly monetized, consumer-crushing, microtransaction hellscape that has overwhelmed the video game industry? Well, wouldn't you know it? First, the rumors. A few weeks ago, an alleged source inside Wizards of the Coast suggested that OneDnD would be discontinuing support for OGL content. I have no idea if that source is credible or even exists. But I will say that, in my opinion, the logic passes the sniff check, even if the source itself may or may not be, existent. How will a digital-first, monetized ecosystem continue to support an unrestricted third-party community? Simplest answer, it won't. Walled gardens don't work if you leave the gate unlocked. As of this recording, this rumor exists only as a rumor. This is one of those areas that I hope to be pleasantly surprised in. Wizards might have a deep commitment to its indie scene and be building a killer toolset that will enable us to continue supporting and advocating for their products well into the future, recognizing that a vibrant creative community that advocates for their product is a much more valuable thing in the long term than whatever short-term gains might be realized by excluding them. Wizards of the Coast might also be genetically engineering fire-breathing ponies to hand out as booth swag at PAX 2023. Probably not, but maybe. This is, notably, where the distinction between OGL content and DMsGuild content becomes important. Killing the OGL while maintaining the DMsGuild is not a hard scenario to imagine, as it would solve the business conflict between third parties and an insular monetized platform, while still ostensibly presenting a friendly space for community offerings. The inherent problem being that those community offerings would, of course, by default, fall under Wizards' IP licensing rights, and can be capitalized on and implemented with internal resources if anything gets enough popularity, with relatively little compensation, or in fact even necessarily permission from the content's creators, depending on how the DMsGuild rules are applied. Now, in the interest of honesty and fairness here, that's not a problem that most of the end users of DMsGuild content, or most of the creators on there, are probably going to feel too much. Instances of Wizards taking DMsGuild content and making it an official centerpiece of whatever product or publishing or buying the rights to anything are, as far as I can tell, very rare, if non-existent. And this is pure speculation on my part, but I don't think the majority of people who are creating content for DMsGuild are unaware of the strictures under which they are operating, and have, for one reason or another, made their peace or are perfectly fine with that going in. This isn't going to rock their world. Where this is a huge issue is for OGL content creators, who would, in this scenario, then have to choose between signing on the dotted line for DMsGuild to continue, or going their own way in a now significantly smaller and more hostile landscape outside of the walled garden. It's also worth noting here that neither the OGL nor DMsGuild cover business-to-business licensing. Bigger entities in the space with established IP and audiences of their own will likely have the leverage required to bring Wizards of the Coast to the negotiating table and hammer out bespoke deals that serve their interests. There is really no world I can conceive of where Wizards of the Coast is stupid enough, for example, to behead a golden goose-like Critical Role by forcing them to accept a deal that they won't play with. And if a powerhouse IP like, say, Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings came knocking, I fully expect that they would get a deal that suited their interests and everyone would walk away happy and much richer. Unfortunately, where this scenario hits the hardest is the calcifying effect it would have on emerging indie businesses, who do not have the reach and resources to negotiate a bespoke deal, but who are not served by the more restrictive terms of the DMsGuild. And let me be clear here, the DMsGuild, even in this scenario, is a great marketplace that I am glad to see supported. If you are a creator who wants to put out classes, supplements, adventures, a myriad of other things that can exist comfortably within the strictures and the ground rules there, I am 100% on board with that. It can even, for a select few, turn into a decent personal income stream. But in my opinion, it would be a foolish endeavor to try and lay the foundation for something bigger there. An ecosystem in which the corporate panopticon above you can simply claim anything that gets too successful as its own inherently has a ceiling on how successful anything within it can ever become. And that in turn caps, for me, the level of investment and time and risk that I'm willing to put into it. If they choose to do so, Wizards of the Coast is well within their rights to follow the pathway similar to what I've just laid out, killing the OGL after 5th edition and going forward with only the DMsGuild or whatever other version of such a marketplace they want, if any. However, I do hope that they won't, as it is my belief that a vibrant and unshackled third-party community has been a significant contributor to the success of 5e, and in fact, all popular editions of the game. 4th edition, notably, did away with the OGL, and I would say similar circumstances, and neither that fact nor that edition as a whole are very well regarded for a wide variety of reasons by many in the fandom today. It is not unreasonable for Wizards of the Coast to dismiss that conclusion, and say that OneDnD, a decade after the end of 4th edition, will be launching into a fundamentally different set of circumstances with the rise of digital and all these other factors. And therefore the parallel is non-consequential for their business decisions. But it is my suspicion that a lack of OGL content or support will not be as consequence-free as they might hope. In the end, it's up to the decision makers at Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro how they want to proceed in that regard, and time will tell what the real fallout is. Now, that was all rumors. That was discussion of a hypothetical. Let's get into what they actually said with their mouths. On December 8th, 2022, WotC CEO Cynthia Williams and Hasbro CEO and former WotC CEO Chris Cox sat down for a, quote, fireside chat / investor presentation with UBS. I'll link the whole thing down below, and for transparency, I'm also pulling a couple of quotes from Polygon's article on the meeting by Charlie Hall and Bell of Lost Souls article on the same meeting by J.R. Zambrano. I hope I'm saying that right. Both of which I'll also link below, but if you want to look for other commentary and interpretation of the discussion that was within the meeting, has been widely reported on and can be turned up with a simple Google search. Much of the presentation was framed as a rebuttal to Bank of America's recent double downgrade of Hasbro's stock, citing specifically dissatisfaction with WotC's handling of its other major tentpole property, Magic the Gathering. But when questions did turn from that to the future of Dungeons & Dragons, both executives expressed enthusiasm for D&D Beyond and their upcoming virtual client's ability to create, quote, recurrent spending environments. Let's get it right, Chris. D&D is under-monetized, they said, citing the logic that DMs outspend players. And they would really prefer to capture more purchases from that other segment of their audience, which they estimate is about 80% of it. From Polygon. Dungeon Masters only make up 20% of the audience, but they are the largest share of our paying players today, said Williams, who previously worked at Microsoft as general manager and vice president of its gaming ecosystem commercial team. Quote, for the rest of the players at the table, we believe digital will allow us to offer a lot more options to create a rewarding experience, end quote. From Bell of Lost Souls. Under the new concepts unveiled in the fireside chat, D&D will transition into a, quote, 4-quadrant brand, end quote, which means not just the TTRPG, but also video games, movies, toys, and more. You might be wondering, doesn't D&D already do this? The answer is yes, but WotC has only just begun to monetize. With the potential to sell things to a full 80% of their user base, per their numbers, they stand to make a lot more money. A lot of money. Yeah, that sucks and I hate it. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, we just won't pay them. I'm not gonna. If I have to stick with pen and paper and just keep playing 5th edition and ignore OneDnD, I will. And I get it. I'm with you. You might be correct on that. A lot of us said the same thing about Diablo Immortal and Battlefront 2 and freaking Oblivion's DLC Horse Armor, and a lot of us did stick to our guns on that. But Diablo Immortal is still pumping it more into Blizzard's balance sheet every month than some studios make after a multi-year launch. The subtext that's easy to miss here when discussing company moves like this is that Hasbro and Wizards and other companies in their position, Activision, Blizzard, whoever, EA, whoever else you want to point the finger at, are perfectly happy to abandon you if you don't want to play ball, so long as they can hook someone with deeper pockets to replace you. I don't know a lot of people my age or older, for example, and this is anecdotal, I understand that, but I don't know a lot of people my age who have accidentally spent hundreds or thousands of dollars on mobile game microtransactions. It certainly happens, yes, and there are examples that you can find out there, but it would be notable to me if someone in my friend circle accidentally did that one day. I do know a lot of those same friends' kids who have done that, though. And all of these gaming companies, and I'm sure Hasbro and WotC want to be members of that same echelon, are perfectly happy cashing those checks, even if it means their parents don't like them anymore. Wizards, Hasbro, Blizzard, all of these companies, they are catering to the markets that will pay them the most. Shedding old fans is not a deal breaker, it is a variable in a risk-benefit analysis. If, in their estimation, the balance of the market is tipping towards acceptance of a new paradigm that stands to make them truckloads more cash, they will pivot hard and amputate those of us who won't come along like a gangrenous limb. And let me, real quick, get in front of something here, because you can't use a franchise name in this space without someone rushing in to scream at you that the problem isn't the problem that you're talking about, it's that you're not talking about their preferred franchise. Wizards of the Coast and D&D are the first in this space. They are not going to be the last. Punch in on me here. Some of you need to hear this. Corporations are not your friends. They don't love you back. They are economic engines that are designed to create the most profit for the least expense and continue to grow year over year to increase the value of shareholders. That's it. They will do exactly as much as you let them get away with before you stop giving them your money. If Wizards really has cracked an infinite money glitch here, and you think for a second that every other competitor in the space with the means to do so is not immediately going to try and duplicate their results, you are delusional. I actually think it's going to look a lot like the horde of half-assed cable company streaming services that chased after Netflix as soon as they hit it big, and who knows which ones are going to be left standing and which ones are going to be eaten or destroyed or dismantled by the time the dust settles. But I promise you that every executive at every single one of those companies that has a board or shareholders or investors to answer to is going to demand that it be them. Remember, once upon a time, Blizzard Entertainment was the golden paragon company that would never do any wrong by its users. Oh, how the mighty fall. What I'm saying here is that I think it's healthy to have a mentality that is slightly more proactive than, well, this company that I like would never do that to me. That's all. Anyway. So that's breaking down my concerns with the direction that OneDnD might go from the consumer's perspective. From the creator's side, it's actually worse. I'll speak from my own position. I could draw a line in the sand for when it comes to Sea of Cinders and say, no, I'm going to stop at 5th edition and keep creating there. I think that's probably a viable move for at least a couple of years, especially as we see how the adoption of this theoretical new version of OneDnD rolls out. 6th edition, 5.5, whatever they wind up calling it. This will almost certainly be what happens to Sea of Cinders now, moving forward, at least in its first iteration. We're pretty heavily into it, and I'm not going to throw out a couple of years of work just because of theoreticals of how they might push me out of the next space coming down the line. But in the long term, as a business, as a creator, as an individual, this isn't a solution. There are not a lot of creators going today that are thriving making content for 4th edition, 3.5, 3E, or even further back, even though there are still players for those games. It's just not enough to support another ecosystem on top of it. Eventually, the audience bleeds away for greener pastures, whether that's the next edition or the new kid in town, and you're stuck operating at a purely niche level, or you have to move on yourself. So, after all that, after 5,000 words of doom and gloom, Here's what I'm doing about it. I said above that I hope to be proven wrong about some of my worst fears concerning the future of D&D in particular and the TTRPG landscape as a whole. That's true, but it has also become obvious to me that I cannot comfortably sit back and trust the powers that be to act in the best long-term interest of the players and creators so long as there's profit to be reaped by screwing us. And I cannot conceive of how I am supposed to, and this is purely on me, this is an endeavor that I embarked on, and I recognize that, but I cannot conceive of how I am supposed to move forward and tackle a project with the scale of Sea of Cinders with that amount of uncertainty looming over everything on the horizon, even if all of these concerns amount to nothing in the long run. So I'm building a contingency plan. For the past couple of months, I've been developing Relict RPG. Relict is a free, open, setting-agnostic tabletop gaming system that I've designed and illustrated myself. It incorporates some of my favorite elements from systems that I've played over the years, things I've come up with in the course of working on Cinders that either didn't fit Cinders or didn't fit 5th edition mechanics in general, and a healthy dose of things that I just thought would be cool to try. Some of the things I'm really excited about are my take on a graphical damage system replacing a hit point-based one, and the spells and abilities system that I'm writing and testing that is promising so far, that plays a little bit more like Wizards of the Coast's other beloved and arguably recently mismanaged property, Magic, where players are managing a regenerating pool of resources and can choose whether to spend them on small moves, big moves, or to power up moves into weird esoteric effects. Relict is highly experimental. Today, the core rules and the character creation guide are up on kind of a beta test level, and I'm soliciting feedback, and I hope you'll go check them out and tell me what you think. And I'm working through getting player classes and monsters up as soon as I can so that people can actually start playing games with this. Relict is going to live at this kind of playtest level, alpha, beta test state for a while I run games, gather feedback both locally from my people and through anyone who wants to try it, report back at your own table how it goes. And I'll continue to update, make changes, add stuff, remove stuff, and kind of feel things out. A lot of things may change from the time this video goes live and the day that I eventually say that 1st edition Relict is complete. But in the course of building all of this, it's a journey I'm actually pretty excited for. I'm incorporating a lot of things that have kind of lived in the margins of my sketchbooks for a long time that I just never had an outlet for. It's a really fun, creative diversion for me. I've been living and breathing 5th edition rules for a couple years now, and it's just really cool as a creative, as a writer, as a designer, as an artist to just do stuff that, like, hey, this never would have fit before. Let's try it. Let's see how it goes. It's a journey I'm excited to go on, and I hope that at least some of you will be intrigued enough by this to check it out too. Because here's the thing, I'm a one-man show, and I'm going to do the best job I can, but to actually make it great, we're going to need feedback from a community that I hope will grow along with it. Like I said, Houndsong most days is a one-man show. I have a friend who partners with me to do some of the bigger art pieces for Sea of Cinders. He's an amazing artist. He has specialties that I don't, so we really complement each other well. And I've got a kick-ass local scene, game stores, my friends that I play with, some of the local community that jump in to help me play test Cinders and other projects that I'm working on as their lives and schedules allow it. But day to day, it's me just trying to do the best thing that I can and hoping it works out. This doesn't pay my bills. Actually, it is a bill. Cinders was supposed to be the debut product, and now that's been kicked back a little bit because of, stuff. And creating this stuff is not free. At the very least, websites and software cost me a chunk, and so I put it up and I work full-time to pay for it. There is no scenario in which I can imagine meaningfully disrupting whatever plans a multi-billion-dollar corporation like Hasbro wants to put into motion, not with the resources that I have at my disposal. They may even be correct about what consumers are going to tolerate, and players like us who aren't happy being nickel and dime for cosmetics and a la carte content may be relegated to history in this field. But what I can do, with the skills that I have and the resources that I can spend, is make sure that there is another option, damn it. Relict will be free. It lives entirely on the website. If you start following today, you'll see me actively building much of it, replacing placeholder content or prototype material with more polished versions as time goes on. It'll stay there as long as I'm in a place in my life where I can afford to keep it going, and as long as someone is there to see it. Maybe someday I'll figure out spell cards or dice or accessories or something that I can sell as merch to recoup some of the costs. I don't know. But what I'm not going to do, because I hate it, is lock down the game and then sell it in chunks to bleed people dry a drop at a time. It's gross, I don't like it, and it pisses me off that this has become the state of affairs for so many of the franchises and industries that I grew up enjoying and loving. Relic will be open. If you want to use it for your game, show, podcast, whatever, you can. Just give me a name drop once in a while so other people can find it. If you want to create your own content for it, that would be the coolest shit I can imagine. Just point people back to the source, and I'm happy. If you want, and I recognize that this is getting way ahead of myself on this one, but if you eventually want to create commercial work based on Relic or incorporating all or part of the system, awesome. I will implement some version of an OGL if there's any actual interest in that department. Not to limit anyone, but just to say that I don't own your thing, you don't own my thing, and neither of us own Bob's thing. That's it. There's a forum on the site to drop me a line if you want to pursue any of these avenues, and I'll try and get back to you and deal with whatever your personal situation is as it unfolds. As of right now, I'm mostly focused on just getting the system up and running and implemented and polished. As I said, I will prioritize getting that OGL in place when there's real demand for it, and things are probably a little more stated, a little more congealed, I guess. But if you're thinking along these lines and you like what you're seeing so far, do drop me a line and let me know, because that helps me plan what needs to happen in what form. Relic is setting agnostic. This means you can run a game in whatever world you want. The system doesn't care. Again, someday it'd be cool to release an official setting, maybe, or even drag and drop adventures that you can plop into whatever world you're running with the system. I don't know. But first things first, there's a lot of work to do on my part before any of that matters. I'm also experimenting with incorporating a world building system into the website, away from GMs to quickly define and document key characteristics of a new world for them to play in, answering questions, what is the state of affairs of technology and culture and religion and factions and blah, 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 to kind of quickly build up a campaign for them to play in before there's official content out there, because I know some people will spend years world building for themselves, and some people really, really prefer to work with an established setting. I am trying to bridge that gap. Again, it's me. It's just me. Give me a second, I'll get there. That's probably my most immediate next step once enough of the features are playable and in a state that people can start trying out the game and doing things. That'll be my next focus. At the end of the day, Relic isn't going to be perfect. It can't be. Nothing really is. But it will be free, it will be open, and it'll hopefully be fun. I have a lot of concerns over where this hobby is heading. I covered some of them today. I explained why this hobby is important to me and how it's affected my life. If you've made it this far into this video, you either really are pissed off at me about something, or I probably hit a nerve with something that was important to you about it as well. I don't have most of the answers. I may not have any of them, actually. There's a chance I am dead wrong on all counts, and there is nobody who will be more thrilled about that than I am. Even if this video goes wildly viral, I can't incite enough backlash and pressure to make the corporate Goliaths that are steering the ship and making the highest level decisions in this space change course. Not when there's that much money on the table. I don't have the reach or the leverage to do that. I'm not sure anybody does. There may be other options out there that I'm not thinking of. Someone else, if they want to pick up this torch and run with it, may be the person or the group or the people or the movement to make that meaningful change. Relic is what I know how to do. Arguably pretty well. So that's what I'm going to try. I hope you'll come along with me there, or at the very least that I've articulated something in the course of this that you found useful in your own way, and it can inform your next decisions and help explore your feelings on these topics. That's where I'm at. From here on out, I guess we just roll the initiative and see how it goes. Thanks for watching.